Hey guys, so I feel a little better and I didn't want to leave you without a video this week, so let's talk about impurity. This is going to be a snippet, basically a trailer to a video that I'm working on and that I'll publish in the future that talks more in depth about the concept of impurity in Japan. But let's start with just picking your mind on this. So what's the first thing that you think about if I tell you the word impurity? Well, the answer will depend very much on which culture you come from. And if you're Japanese, or if you lived in Japan long enough, your answer could probably be either women, shamans, or ronins. And why is that? Well, as you know, Japan, and if you see my video about LGBTQ plus rights in Japan, Japanese society is one of the worst, most misogynistic societies in the world, unfortunately. And this is has nothing to do with racism, or I'm not saying, of course, that every Japanese person is misogynistic. It's data. It's data that Japanese work culture is terribly misogynistic. It's one of the developed countries, if I'm not mistaken. It's like the first developed country who has the worst gender pay gap between, of course, male and female workers, and has the least amount of female workers, of women, in positions of power or management. And then this is also tied to another beautiful conversation about the concept of face in Japan and the difference between power versus authority, which are not the same thing, but at least from a socio-cultural perspective. But let's go back to the topic at hand. So not many of you may know that Japanese society started as, if you can talk about society in that time, started as matriarchal. And this is crazy, right? Because right now we see Japan as one of the most conservative and patriarchal societies in the world. And how come? Well, it's a lot of societies, a lot of cultures started as matriarchal. And that's because of how life was organized at the time. Here we're talking about prehistory, or technically even history, but prehistory. So we're talking around 10,000 BCE, so before or around the Jomon period. Japanese society was organized in tribes, in groups, and they were mostly nomadic, and they survived on hunting and gathering, and sometimes fishing, depending if they were on the coast or not. And therefore, society's life was organized around the seasons for what concerns supporting life, but culturally it was revolving around birth. Of course, it was the moment the group becomes too big to sustain itself in the place where it is, there's not enough resources to gather to feed everyone. That would become a serious problem to the survival of the whole group, the whole tribe. And therefore, women were at the center of the village life. Birth was the core concept of the culture of the time. Before pottery, before any kind of craftsmanship or any kind of cultural development. And what would happen when they would become too many? Usually, persons would be ostracized, would be cast out of the group, and they would either, if they were lucky to survive, they would either join other tribes with a lack of members because of whatever reason, or they would find other outcasts and found a new tribe. And that's basically how society was organized at that time. Then during the Jomon period, so again, from 10,000 BCE circa to 300 BCE, if I'm not mistaken, around that time, Japanese tribes tended to become more sedentary. They started some sort of cultivation, some sort of burning the forest to the ground, burning a sector of a forest to the ground when they exhausted the natural resources, moved to another sector, and, you know, circling around, giving time to nature to regrow and, you know, refresh itself and restart. But the cultural shakeup came when, in around 300 BCE, Japan felt like basically there was a huge influx of people from the Korean peninsula. Those migrations not only changed the somatic and genetic tracks of Japanese people to the ones that we can think of today. There's a lot of theories about the fact that Japanese somatic tracks could have been more close, the original, like, it's a bad thing to say original, but like the Jomon people were closer to Ainu somatic tracks, for instance, than the ones that we see today in Japanese people, which are closer to, they're much more closer, not to Ainus, but to Chinese people, Chinese population. But aside from that, the cultural shakeup came with that because they introduced rice culture. They introduced the rice cultivation, and that completely changed the socio-cultural landscape, because now society was definitely sedentary. They organized around in villages, in valleys, around the mountains. Again, if you know a little about Japanese geography, they don't have prairies, they don't have flat land, they just have mountains and valleys mostly. But because of that, now for safety, of course, villages were in the valleys, not necessarily at the bottom, but around the valleys, and they organized rice culture around that. And what does that mean? It means that now the core concept, the core cultural concept at the base, at the foundation of newfound villages and tribes, is not birth anymore. Birth is still important. It's a survival asset for the village. But now the time is organized around rice culture, the time of rice, when you plant it, when you transplant it, when you have to wash it, when you do the when you gather it, then when you sow it. There's, in this period, a lot of rituals came to be around the cultivation. You know, all the rituals that are about prosperity, or, you know, there's a famous ritual, if I'm not mistaken, involving demons that is done, like people masked as onis, as demons, around in October, I think, around the time when you sow the rice from the paddies. But anyways, the point is that now there's boundaries. There's no more nomadic. Again, they're not nomadic anymore. There's boundaries to the village and to the culture. What does it mean? It means that, like, your mind, your perception of the world changes. Now the mountain is a limit. You know, you can't cultivate rice up from a certain point upward because it's too cold. Now the shift, again, it's here that the society becomes more patriarchal, because the women now, like the shift, the focus now is on working the fields, and women can work the fields, of course, and they do, but they have to be some sort of protected when they are pregnant, of course, again, because new life is essential to the survival of a village, not as much as it was when they were nomadic, but this changes the perspective. Also, now with rice, you can have rice is an extremely profitable crop to grow, because it gives a lot of yield with very little expenses, not in terms of water, but in terms of seeds. And therefore, you can feed many more mouths, much more population with just one yield of rice instead of just hunting and gathering. And this changed perspective, as I was saying. This and the introduction. I don't think we can talk about the introduction of Taoism at this point in time during the Yayoi period, but that and subsequent, of course, this is way later. I think around 500 CE, but the introduction of core concepts of Taoism that basically state that the human body is a reflection of the universal body. They see the universe as the core. One of the core concepts at the foundation of Taoism is that the universe is a reflection of your own body and vice versa. It's all about duality, but basically what it says that it always speaks in metaphors and similes, and it's beautiful because if you read those texts, it's like, if I'm not mistaken, one compares the lungs of a human body to lush green forest of spirit. The brain adds the golden palace of reason, and so forth. But the point is that now there's the concepts of body, universal body, and societal body. And so everything that goes out from the human body, and therefore the societal body, is considered as impure. So aside from the obvious things that we humans excrete, and that's also, by the way, why in Japan it's considered very rude to blow your nose. That's the reason. That's the cultural reason. Because everything that comes out from your body is impure, and so doing that in public is considered extremely impolite because of this philosophical subtext. Now, everything that strains from the societal body, or that is liminal, so on the boundaries, is considered impure. And women, of course, for obvious physiological reasons, have one more thing that differs from men that they excrete, which is blood. I'm talking about the menstrual cycle. And that had, unfortunately, as in other human societies, had a very profound impact on the perception of women and how they are impure. Therefore, again, just for that, this kind of primitive cultural belief. The point is that, again, and I just didn't say women, I said also shamans. Why? Because shamans were very important for Japanese culture for up until a certain point, but they still are in some ways. The point is that they are, again, they're liminal, because what a shaman does is that they take God into themselves. They do the transfer, and therefore, and then they speak. They are a tool for the God to use to speak to humans. The point is that makes them liminal between the human world and the spiritual world. And therefore, they are, yes, they're humans, but they are also not. And they are hybrids. Lots of cultures have this hybrid phobia for some reason. The point is that, again, they are hybrids. They are neither of this nor of the other words. They are stuck in between. They're impure because they are at the limits of the societal body. And this is also shown in the geography of villages. Usually a shaman would not live in the village. He will live near the village, but outside. Usually in the forest, up top the mountain, or whatever. There's a lot of different forms of spirituality in Japan. and that also translates to today, and to other, and not only today but to contemporary, to the modern contemporary era. In Japan, not only, again, anyone who exceeds from the boundaries of normal society and expectations is considered, is shunned upon. It's considered impure. Maybe not, again, outspokenly, but that's the cultural subtext, the cultural, at least history. And women suffer from this too, because, for instance, when there were the celebrations at the temples for any kind of Shinto or Buddhist ritual, or syncretic ritual between the two, it depends. In Japan, it's very complicated. Usually women were not permitted to participate at the closest levels, meaning that usually temples are up. Usually they are above something. They're on a hill. They're above, a hill. Women either were not permitted to pass the last of the ritual gates, the portals, if they were menstruating, or I don't remember. I think it was specifically if they were menstruating, or just like in general they were considered impure by default and were not permitted to pass the last gate. But also in some temples, and there's one very famous in Kyoto, if I'm not mistaken, they had what is called an onnazaka, which means a hill, like a staircase in this case, for women. Onna. Why? Again, because they were impure. They had to be separated, which is crazy. It's ridiculous. But culturally, that's where all this comes from. There's a beautiful book about this, by a novel by Enchi Fumiko, called Onnazaka. I don't know if there's an English version, but I recommend everybody to just check it out because it's very interesting. But this is it. This is impurity. This is why. This is where impurity comes from. This is the reason why, historically, at least culturally, philosophically, women in Japan were considered impure. Again, not only women, shamans, ronins, because they lost their masters. They were not part of the society anymore. Everybody who strains from the expectations of society basically is considered impure. So that's it. Again, there's a lot more to talk about, actually. I simplified a lot of stuff. If I said something stupid, this is just me remembering out of the top of my head the sociology and philosophy classes that I attended. If I said something grossly mistaken, please correct me in the comments. But this is again, Japanese culture is creepy, crazy, but beautiful, and extremely interesting. And studying one culture, you start reflecting on how much other cultures are similar, on how humans may may change may reskin the core concepts, but again, usually they all have the same core concepts. Because of how humans interact with each other, a lot they share across time and place and space, a lot of similar characteristics, and it's just fascinating. And that is also reflected in the language, which is what I'm going to talk to you about in my next big video. So this is it. Oh my god, this is such a long video, I didn't realize. I hope you have fun, stay safe, and see you next time.